Look, I'm a somatic professional, and I think somatic spaces sometimes get weird. There's a phrase that gets used almost constantly in embodiment and healing spaces, and it's usually spoken with a kind of reverence. People say, oh, I had a really strong somatic shift or a strong experience. And everyone gets really somber as if the phrase explains something on its own. But I want to slow that down because here's an honest question that almost no one asks out loud. How do you know it was a meaningful somatic signal and not just your nervous system reacting to something ordinary? How do you know that it wasn't anxiety or acid reflux or a stress response or a blood sugar dip or, yes, just heartburn? That's not a joke, by the way. It's a real diagnostic question. Okay, before we go any further, there's another place where orientation matters. Different nervous systems interpret internal sensation very differently. So if you haven't taken our Somatic Skins Quiz, pop yourself down to the description below where it's linked. It's really useful because it shows how your system tends to generate, amplify, or suppress sensation under pressure. Without that lens, people often trust sensation far too quickly as fact. All right, let's get into it. A somatic experience is not just a sensation, a bodily sensation that we feel. Sensation is a raw signal. A somatic experience is what happens when that signal is processed, contextualized, and integrated, either by the mind and the narrative or the nervous system. And that distinction matters because the body is always producing sensations. You could spend your whole life tracking them. Digestion creates sensations. Hormones create sensations. Fatigue creates sensations. Stress creates sensation. Meaning is not inherent in any of that. Meaning emerges only when the nervous system has a stable enough container to interpret what's happening, sorting out importance without being overwhelmed by it. And that's where neurological anchoring comes in. Neurological anchoring is the system's ability to remain oriented while internal intensity increases. It's what allows sensation to be filtered instead of flooding the system. It's what let you say, something is happening here, without immediately assuming that it's profound or dangerous or directive. Without anchoring, sensation becomes authoritative without question. Whatever you feel feels urgent. Whatever arises feels true. Whatever intensifies feels important. And that's a problem because the body does not only generate insight, it also generates noise. In biological terms, intense somatic experiences often involve heightened activity in the autonomic nervous system, heart rate changes, breath patterns shift, stress hormones rise, blood flow redistributes, interoceptive signals get louder, and none of that tells you what the experience means. If the system lacks a durable container, structure, breath capacity, attentional stability, those signals overwhelm interpretation. The person doesn't process the experience, they're taken over by it. And this is why people can have powerful bodily experiences that don't lead to any real change in demonstrable ways. The sensation spikes, the story forms, the nervous system never integrates it. A few days later, the same patterns are still running. Intensity was present. Adaptation was not. A durable biological container does something really specific. It slows the system down long enough to discriminate. It allows sensation to move without collapsing attention. And it creates enough internal space for the nervous system to ask, is this signal relevant or is it just loud? And that's a learned capacity. Think about what happens when internal pressure rises in someone without anchoring. Their breath will tighten immediately. Their attention will either narrow or it'll scatter. The system goes into interpretation mode instead of regulation mode. Everything feels personal, symbolic, or threatening. And without anchoring, that becomes very confusing. With anchoring, the experience is very different. Sensation will still rise, sometimes strongly, but the system can stay organized. Breath continues. Posture holds. Attention stays wide enough to contextualize. The experience can be metabolized properly, and this is why anchoring has to precede meaning making. If you don't have a container that can withstand internal pressure, you cannot trust what arises inside it. And that's going to make me unpopular to say. And that's not because your sensations are fake, but because the system isn't stabilized enough to filter that signal from noise. This is where embodiment often goes off the rails because people will chase sensation, well-meaning, before they have built containment. They seek intensity before they train stability, because intensity is where all the fun fireworks live, and no one wants to do the stabilizing work beforehand. So they assume that a stronger experience means that deeper work was done, and in reality, they just might mean weaker filters. A nervous system that collapses under sensation cannot extract wisdom from it. This is also why some people become dependent on intense practices. They need the spike to feel that something meaningful has occurred because the system hasn't learned how to generate coherence without it. The container is externalized instead of built internally. Neurological anchoring will reverse that. It's built through practices that increase the system's ability to stay present under pressure. Load-bearing structure, breath control under rising CO2, attention training that doesn't fragment when sensation intensifies, recovery that actually clears the stress hormones instead of just pausing them and then carrying them forward. Over time, the system learns something crucial. Intensity is survivable. Sensation, it's not an emergency. And signal can be interpreted without panic. That's when somatic experiences become trustworthy. And that isn't because they became quieter or you became more numb, but because the system receiving them is stronger. This is why we are so freaking passionate about the somatic skins and why it focuses so heavily on building the biological container before exploring expression or insight. Because without anchoring, somatic work just becomes impressionistic at best and destabilizing at worst. It's why also inside the Prestige, intense experiences, our event simulators, are always paired with training that increases containment, real capacity. We don't want to diminish sensation, but we do want to make it usable and to make sure that the nervous system can actually process what it's encountering. A real somatic experience isn't always defined by how strong it feels. It's defined by whether your system can stay organized long enough to integrate it meaningfully. If you can't tell the difference between insight and indigestion yet, that's not failure. It just means that the container isn't built, and containers can be trained. Now, we had some fun with this video. I hope you enjoyed it too. Please do consider liking and subscribing. Helps the channel out. And if you'd like to train all of this live with us, consider a season of the Prestige. Bye for now.